Welcome to Doing the Work, a Naples integrated recovery podcast. My name is Brian, and this space is for anyone tired of surviving the same emotional and behavioral loops, whether that's anxiety, trauma, addiction, or problems in your relationships. Around here, we cut the surface level advice and sugarcoating, no platitudes. We focus on clarity, responsibility, emotional discipline, and the courage to look at yourself honestly so that you can stop repeating old patterns and start living with intention instead of reaction. Let's get into it. Today, I wanted to talk about something that hits every single one of us, no matter how educated, self-aware, credentialed, or responsible we are, and we are talking about the lizard brain hijack. You can run a private practice, have a graduate degree, a Florida Department of Health clinical license, you can pay a mortgage and handle everybody else's crises for a living, and then still get whipped around in 12 milliseconds because the amygdala spiked because somebody cut you off in traffic. So today I wanted to talk about neurobiology, the metaphor, the second arrow, which comes from Buddhism, a little bit of cognitive behavioral therapy, and how vulnerability is the actual glue that turns reactivity into regulation. And I'm going to share how all of this plays out in real time, both with some examples from my life and some of the work that I do with clients. Maybe you don't have that reaction in traffic, but let me give you a different example. Something painfully ordinary that probably fires off some ancient fire alarms for some of us. When I am at Publix and I have three things, I just needed some headache medicine, a plant, of course, and some seltzer water, and then I step in line for the 10 items or less, quick checkout, perfect, quick, clean, simple, and the woman in front of me unloads 15 items on the belt. Instantly, before I am even fully aware of it, my nervous system lights up. Here's the insane part. My lizard brain does not know how to tell the difference between this and being chased by a lion. Isn't that absurd? Because this part of the brain has barely even evolved. It reacts the same way whether someone is breaking grocery store etiquette or running for your life. So the internal monologue kicks off. Who does this woman think she is? And my mind starts counting her items like I'm investigating a felony again from my years in law enforcement. 11, 12, 13, 14, rising disgust that has absolutely nothing to do with logic or danger, just old wiring misreading this tiny inconvenience as a threat to my safety. But once I catch it, once I can label what's happening, everything shifts. Oh, that's the amygdala. It wasn't a personal insult. This woman did not wake up and leave her house this morning thinking, I can't wait to go to Publix to screw with Brian Graneman today. Didn't happen. All it was, biology firing on outdated settings. And just like that, my prefrontal cortex comes back online, my breathing normalizes, irritation drops. I can look at her and think, she's probably overwhelmed or exhausted or not counting, or I know what that's like to be in a rush. And I've had plenty of those days myself. And that is the entire practice, not to eliminate the reaction, but to catch it before it builds into a story. The brain operates on two speeds. Fast is your amygdala, the survival reflex, fight or flight, emotional alarms, and slow, your prefrontal cortex, reasoning, regulation, and perspective. And the fast system fires way before the slow system ever even gets a vote. This is the price of evolution. And here's the part that most people don't get. Your thoughts Especially the immediate, intrusive, or reactive ones are not evidence. They're just the brain trying to explain a physiological surge. So your body reacts first, and then your mind creates meaning second. And if you don't catch that, your interpretation of events will always run your entire emotional life. Long before cognitive behavioral therapy, there was an idea that came from Buddhism called the second arrow metaphor. The metaphor goes something like this. Life is going to hit you with a first arrow. Something is going to happen. Someone is going to cut you off. Your boss is going to tell you to finish that report and he's going to have a little bit of a tone with it. Or somebody is going to have 15 items in that 10 item or less lane and your whole bloodstream freaks out. That first arrow is unavoidable. It's the initial shock, the activation, and the surge. That's your biology, and that's the amygdala doing exactly what it's supposed to do to keep you alive. But the second arrow, that one is optional, and that one is self-inflicted. That is when you add a story to the moment. So, first arrow is, she has 15 items. Neutral fact. Second arrow is, she is disrespecting me. She's selfish. This always seems to happen to me. Who the hell even raised her? And all of those things are where suffering comes from, not the event itself. And it's fascinating because cognitive behavioral therapy says this exact same thing without ever mentioning that it came from Buddhism, or it's also all over Stoicism. But in cognitive behavioral therapy language, it is something happens, then your interpretation kicks in, and then that interpretation creates your emotional outcome. Then with the emotional outcome come your behaviors, like giving her a sigh or an eye roll or saying, yeah, I guess some people just don't think that the rules apply to them. The key is this. Your interpretation is not some objective truth. It's the brain trying to explain a physical reaction that happened in 12 milliseconds. And it feels personal. It feels intentional. It feels like you've been violated. And really, it's just your mind trying to make sense out of that jolt of adrenaline. The second arrow is the meaning that you attach to the moment. And once you become aware of that, once you see the story forming, then you have a choice. You can stay inside that instinct of she is a threat, or you can step back and just say, okay, my body reacted. My brain is filling in the blanks, and I don't have to fire the second arrow on myself. And that is where freedom is. Not in pretending that the first arrow didn't hurt or that you didn't get pissed off, but in refusing to manufacture 10 more arrows out of habit. The second arrow is where most of the emotional damage happens. It's where your resentment starts, it's where your anxiety builds, it's where shame multiplies, and it's where small moments turn into full-blown spirals. The work isn't for you to avoid discomfort. It's to stop adding additional suffering. And the moment that you can see that story forming in your mind, the split second that you notice, oh, that's me adding meaning, the whole nervous system starts to shift. Now you've moved from biology to choice, from instinct to awareness, and from lizard brain to the part of you that can actually respond with intention. All emotional maturity comes down to this skill. Can you notice your own activation early? Not fix it, not suppress it, not spiritualize it. If you have listened to any of the recordings that I've done so far with EMDR scripts or paced breathing or any of that stuff with internal family systems, the key word is always just notice. Can you notice that first punch of adrenaline and then think, oh, I got activated. I don't have to follow it. A concept that comes from Viktor Frankl's book, Man's Search for Meaning, is that of between the stimulus and response, that there is a space between. I think that's also a Dave Matthews Band song. And that space is about our power to choose our response. And in that response lies our growth and freedom. And for most people, that space is about the width of a pubic hair. But the more that you practice noticing, the wider that space between gets. Now, here is where everything gets really real. And this is one of the deeper layers that I get to, especially when I work with couples, but it's also just really prevalent in any kind of emotional wound or trauma work. And that is that most reactivity isn't about anger, it's not about disrespect, it's not about injustice, it's about vulnerability. And Brene Brown's work really nails this. If you have not seen Call to Courage or The Power of Vulnerability, vulnerability is showing up without your armor, and the amygdala hates that. Most of our overreactions are rooted in shame, fear of inadequacy, fear of being dismissed, fear of disconnection, fear of losing control, or fear of being misunderstood. So the body reacts first, and then the brain builds a narrative that protects you from vulnerability. That is why anger feels easier than admitting fear. And that is why certainty feels safer than uncertainty. It's why criticism feels protective when you're overwhelmed, and why withdrawing feels safer than showing somebody that they hurt your feelings. Vulnerability isn't about being soft, it's about being accurate and honest. It's the only thing that lets the prefrontal cortex take the wheel again, because when you can say, this feels personal, but it probably isn't, or this is discomfort, not danger, or my brain is filling in the blanks with old data. That is when your nervous system starts to recalibrate. Here is how you can go about practicing this in the real world. 1. Notice the physiology. Just notice what happens with your body. Does your chest feel tight? Do you notice your breath changing? Does your face get hot? Do you notice that you maybe clench your fists or start looking around like where you might escape to or anything like that? Those are all your first warning signs. Second, name what's happening. This is an amygdala spike. This is 12 milliseconds of my biology. Just for perspective, a second is 1,000 milliseconds. So 12 milliseconds is 12 thousandths of a second. That is 1.2% of a second. Okay, that's basically instantaneous, reacting before conscious mind has even booted up. Naming that is not cheesy. It allows you to just activate that prefrontal cortex that can start to actually make sense of everything. Third, interrupt the story. Don't just pretend that you're unbothered or that you're calm. Ask yourself, okay, what else could be true here? Like, could she be in a rush? Or maybe she didn't even see the sign. Like maybe she just saw a shorter line and just went for it. It's not always personal. Fourth, consider the vulnerability that might be underneath that reaction. So, usually there is a newer, softer truth that is under the surface, like I felt dismissed, or I'm afraid of being misunderstood, or I'm embarrassed that I'm wrong. That is the stuff that actually moves the needle. Fifth, choose a response instead of a reflex. And this is a part that I think people misunderstand, thinking that emotional regulation means that you're always going to be calm, peaceful, unbothered, some monk that's just floating above reality, and that is not doing the work. That's not even realistic. Choosing a response instead of a reflex isn't about eliminating the reaction, it's about interrupting the chain after the reaction has already fired. So choosing a response means stepping in not to erase the reaction, but to redirect the meaning. Sounds like, okay, I'm activated, this doesn't feel good, but I don't have to follow the first story that my brain is trying to write here. You're not shutting down your feelings, you're steering them. And by saying, I feel tension, but I don't need to escalate, or I felt insulted, but I don't know that that's actually true, or I feel urgency, but I know that this isn't life or death. When you do that, even once, you're already living in a different nervous system. So, as they say in peer-led recovery, progress, not perfection. This isn't about enlightenment or being unbothered. It's about just trying to even have a 1% shift in the moment. It's that tiny gap where you say, I'm going to respond from the part of my brain that's actually evolved, not the part that thinks that I'm being hunted by a lion. And that is the work. That's emotional maturity. That is agency. A lot of this internal work comes down to honesty. Not emotional perfection, not spiritual bypassing, and not becoming somebody who never gets irritated at Walmart. The point is just to get honest about how your nervous system actually works. Here's the uncomfortable truth. A lot of our suffering comes from pretending that we're more evolved than we actually are. We would all love to act like I'm above this, or I am calmer, or I should have known better, or I shouldn't react like that. But your nervous system doesn't care who you are, doesn't care if you have a master's degree, doesn't care if you have been a practicing psychotherapist for 30 years, doesn't matter how many letters you have after your name or how many people you help each week. It reacts the way that it reacts. And then you get to decide what you're going to do with that reaction. So the real growth isn't about eliminating the surge, it's about getting curious instead of being ashamed of it. It's in noticing, I'm taking this personal, or my brain is trying to create a story right now, or I'm making a big deal out of nothing. And then choosing not to let that story become the truth of the moment. So, next time you feel that surge, if you're on the road, if you're bickering with your significant other, if you're standing in line at Publix, or if you're in a moment where something just doesn't land right, you don't need to moralize it. Don't shame yourself for being human. Just notice it. Then tell the truth about what's actually happening. Biology fired first, then interpretation tried to take over. Vulnerability is sitting underneath it, and that is how you stay away from a second arrow. Your old circuitry is always going to fire first. That's just biology. But the real evolution is what you do next. So, what do you do? Do you escalate? Do you retreat? Do you armor up? Do you get good and drunk? Do you double down on your first interpretation? Or do you step back long enough to say, hold on a second, this is activation, not evidence. I'm going to respond from the part of my brain that actually has access to reason, nuance, and empathy. That is building muscle, that's doing real training, and that is doing the work. Not trying to control a first arrow, you can't. But Refusing to fire 5 more arrows at yourself, oh yeah, that you can do. And it changes everything. Your relationships, communication, your recovery, your self-confidence, how you handle conflict, and how you show up in your own life. Here's the irony. When you stop fighting your own biology, you don't feel controlled by it. You become less reactive, not because you're trying to be calm, but because you're finally honest about what's happening inside you. And that's where people start to feel different. Not more perfect, just more real. Not invulnerable, just grounded. Not armored, but capable of choosing the version of themselves that they want to bring in that moment. And that's the whole point. Not becoming someone who never reacts, but becoming someone who actually understands what their reactions mean. And that, my friends, is really the whole point. Not to be someone who never reacts, but someone who understands their reactions deeply enough to respond with intention. Thanks for spending the time with me. If this episode was useful, feel free to share it with someone who might need it. Please be kind to yourself, be kind to people around you. Most of us are doing the best that we can with the tools that we currently have, and we're all capable of growing past them. If you'd like to reach out or connect, email me, brian@naplesintegratedrecovery.com. Hope to hear from you there. Otherwise, we'll see you on the next one. Take care.